recorded last year, and that was a big one. Okay, so today's Chumash, we're going to learn a lot of the. I also want to mention today's class is dedicated by Avi. Thank you, Avi Rubinov, for dedicating today's class. He asked me to mention. What did Avi ask me to mention? A refuah shlema and success for. Let me read the names here. Gelena bat Nina, Nina bat Sarah, Liana bat Nina, Rosa bat Sarah, Mati ben Yaakov should have success and refuah shlema and everything that they need. Amen. If anybody wants to include names, do it now. You can do it now. Otherwise, we will continue and learn the Chumash. Okay. The Torah tells us that don't pervert judgment of a poor man in his lawsuit. So they come before the judge. One is a Evyon, and Rashi says an Evyon is not just a poor man. That's the word is oni. An Evyon is someone that is misaev. He's oiva. He's medudol v'toiv v'chol toiv. Rashi says that he has nothing, literally nothing, and is totally desperate for anything because he has nothing. Not just is he poor, he's more than poor. And you come before a court, and the judge might, as we said in the previous class, we had a similar verse, might want to be like Robin Hood, and might want to say, look, this guy has nothing to his name. I should maybe lean the law in judgment of the very, very, not just poor, but extremely poor person, and let him win. And the Torah says, no, a court of law has to follow the law. You could go do charity and nice things out of the court of law, but in a court of law, when people come before the judge and there's a lawsuit going on, he has to do the letter of the law, cannot move one iota from the letter of the law, no matter the circumstances of the people that are before him. Then afterwards, you could say, listen, do the guy a favor, but when they come before the court for law, you have to follow exactly what the law is. Midvar sheker tirchak. Stay very far away from a lie. Distance yourself. Very careful in life. Listen to that very powerful rule in life. Distance yourself from a false matter. Be extremely far away. Person in life needs to be straight and honest and fear and stay far away from any kind of falsehood. We got to be in life. We have to be on the straight and narrow and clear and honesty and stay very far away from any kind of falsehood. V'naki v'tzadoik al taroig. And a innocent person and someone who is not guilty, you should not kill someone. So in other words, what does that mean? An innocent person or someone who's not guilty, you shouldn't kill. So the circumstances Rashi explains is that you could have two parts to the story here. They come before the court. This guy did a terrible crime. And the court said, listen, we see what's going on. And he gets the death penalty for his crime. He did a crime that deserved death penalty. He killed, let's say. And they seal the verdict. The court tells the verdict. And then they take this guy out to kill him, to do capital punishment. This guy did a terrible crime. He now gets capital punishment. On the way, as they're bringing this guy to kill him, the judge says, oh my gosh, I forgot some important piece of information. I forgot to mention that this guy really, I have a very good excuse for him. But the verdict already happened. What do you do? So Rashi says, you bring him back. The judge stands up and he says that I know the verdict was already sealed, but I have a reason that he's not guilty. You go back and, or anyone comes and says, listen, this guy's not guilty. He says, oh, start all over again. Go back to the court, unseal the decision. Go back to the court. Someone has some line of arguing. And that's why he says, even though a person who has been sealed guilty, but perhaps there's a chance that he's innocent, you're not allowed to kill him. If anybody has a reason that comes up, a serious reason, a legitimate reason. I believe the Rambam, when he describes this, he says they have two Torah scholars that right away go to that person and say, what do you have to say? And they hear, oh, the guy's maybe making sense. Shut it down. We'll go back to court, start over again, even though the verdict has already been claimed. You don't say the verdict's already been done. However, what happens, Rashi says, if the flip side happens, the court case came out that the guy is pure. He's not guilty. Came out, the guy, there was a whole story. This guy killed someone and they came out, no, not guilty. They decided this guy's not guilty. And as they're taking him to the gallows, the opposite story happened from earlier. A guy comes and says, I know for a fact, for sure, even though he's sealed not guilty, he's clean, that I know he's the murderer. He's the one who killed him. We don't take the guy back anymore at this point. Once he's already been sealed, that he doesn't, once the verdict has already come down and they decided that he's not guilty, the judge has decided, you do not bring a guy back once he's already been claimed not guilty. You'll ask the question, well, you're going to let murderers go, bad people who need to be killed off the hook? So listen to the end of this verse. Because don't worry, Hashem says, I'll take care of business. I will never allow a wicked person to be righteous. I'll take care of it. Fine. In the court, they did their best. And the court came to a guilty verdict. They deliberated and they tried to find out what to do. And they came to a non-guilty verdict. But don't worry. It's okay. It's better to side on the side of making a mistake and the guy innocent and then not letting him off the hook, because Hashem could then punish the guy. Hashem has many other ways to himself the death penalty, the capital punishment, when the court came out with a mistake. So depending on the case, if he's sealed not guilty, you don't bring him back. If he's sealed guilty, you can always bring him back. If someone has a good reason, that makes sense. Maybe in the middle of a class, so you need to go up, you need to be quiet to go upstairs. I don't know, but not now, because I'm Tati's in the middle of teaching. Continuing right along, verse 8. Do not take a bribe. Judges should not take any kind of bribery. No airplane rides, and no money, no kind of bribery. Now, it can't mean that the guy's going to the judge and saying to the judge, I want you to lie for me and change the law for me, because we've determined that a judge is not allowed to, God forbid, make a law illegal. That's not according to the letter of the law. So what is the case? What's the reference here referring to when it says that, what is the case referring to when he says here that the judge shouldn't take a bribe? He's referring to a case, very interesting, where the guy might tell the judge, listen, I don't want you to cheat for my side. I'm giving you a bribe. I think you deserve more money. I want to give you money gift. And you don't side with my side. You do whatever you think is right. The Torah tells you you're not allowed to take a bribe. Why not? Because what's going to happen, the verse continues, because that bribe, yaver pikchim, will blind the clear-sighted. That money will drive you crazy. Even someone who's a tremendous scholar in Torah says, and he takes bribery, you want to know, his brain, he'll become deranged. He'll forget his studies. He'll lose his vision, his clarity in life. The fact is, money slants the mind. And as much as he might say and try to learn Torah, he will automatically, he's already impartial. He's partial. He's not impartial. And he's going, and therefore you cannot take a bribe even to judge correctly. Misalif, divrei tzadikim will corrupt the holy words of Torah. Although Torah is holy and pure, the judge who will be trying to learn Torah will not have a clear mind and will not be able to get in touch with what the Torah wants because he took that bribe. Verse 9 about converts. V'ger le'silchatz. Do not oppress a convert. Do not oppress a stranger, a convert. You're not allowed to oppress him. And Rashi says the Torah many times repeats this, that you have to be very sensitive to converts. And he says because the convert was once not Jewish, and had that lust and has that Yetzer Hara, that evil inclination that's perhaps stronger than a regular Jew who's born Jewish, who didn't taste the prohibitions, and he wasn't born, in that sense, in that sentiment, and therefore the convert is much quicker to go back to his previous life than if someone was born a Jew and never had that evil inclination, never had that never had the stuff they're not allowed to have. Therefore, you have to be overly cautious and overly sensitive to converts, to gerim, because they are much easier and quicker to return to the prohibited things which they're not allowed to do now that they're Jewish. So you have to be very careful and not sensitive what you say to them, because they will sin, they'll come to sin and do other prohibited things. And not just that you have to be sensitive to them because they're easier to retract and return to their old ways. You should be sensitive. You yourselves were once foreigners. You know what it feels like to be a foreigner, to not, so a guy who converted might feel estranged from the Jewish people because he might feel estranged from the Jewish nation. Why? Because the convert might feel estranged because, they're not his friends, they're not his family, and so on. and therefore you know exactly how it feels because my friends, the Jewish people, Hashem says to the Jewish people, you were once yourselves living as foreigners, and therefore be extra sensitive and extra kind to the converts that come into the Jewish people. Continues right along about the sabbatical year. In the Jewish life of how we plow and farm life, for 6 years, a person, a Jew, should plow and take care of their field. And you should bring everything into the house. You go, you plow, you plant, you grow all the produce. You grow grain, you grow your whatever produce you have, the fruits, the vegetables, the trees. You're planting, you're running your farm, and you collect everything in, right? You collect your full money that you make, that your field produces. You bring it into the house, you fill up your storage houses from all the investment that you put in. You now collect all that and bring it to your house. But Hashvias, verse 11, when it comes the sabbatical year, the 7th year, that year, Tishmetenu, stop working in your field. You shouldn't work anymore. Stop working your field, no plowing. Vinetashto. And there's 2 ways to interpret this. Either don't even do the smaller kind of works in your field. So what's a bigger kind of work in the field? The second way Rashi explains it is, plowing and planting and not even smaller works. Don't even fertilize it or hoeing it. No works allowed in the field in the sabbatical year. No big work, no small work. You're not allowed to be working in your field. Another interpretation, the way Rashi explains what it's trying to tell you is, you are allowed to only eat from your field. In other words, if it grew on its own, you're not planting, you're not working your field, but still stuff might grow. Stuff does still continue to grow. You can eat it as long, and you can even bring it into your house to eat, as long as it's equal rights to everybody in the field. Which means that, let's say you're not just allowed to go out and pick something, a grape off the vine and eat it. You could even collect grapes in your house, but you could only keep it in your house as long as there's also grapes outside, as long as there's grapes in the vineyard, and animals could come and eat it like we're going to see, and other people can come and eat it. You could even collect some in your house, but only as long can you have piles in your own house from your own field, as long as there's other stuff at us. Once there's no more grapes left in the vineyard or other produce in your yard, you have to empty out all your storage houses, and you're equal to every other person. It's not yours. Even though it's your field, the 7th year, it's not your field. The achlu of yoynei amecha, the verse continues, the destitute people in your land, anyone could come to your field and go and collect the fruits and the vegetables in your field. The yisroim and the leftovers, the wild animals in the field could just walk over to your field and eat whatever they want. Not just should be this done with your wheat field, it should also be done with your grapes, with your vineyard, and your olive trees. These stuff need to be left equal opportunity to everyone. It's not yours, even though the field is yours. On the 7th sabbatical year, Hashem said that you have to leave this field open. So you're celebrating a sabbatical year by not working, no big work, no small work, and allowing the equal rights to everybody onto your field. Everybody has a right. The animals and poor people, whoever wants can come. Whoever wants, it's open to everyone. It's not yours. Your equal rights, just like anybody else in the world, to eat from your field. Now, you might say, interesting. So in that sabbatical year, so 6 years, it's almost like Shabbos. I have to keep 6 years of work, and the 7th year keep Shabbos. Well, what happens with the actual Shabbos? Do I keep Shabbos during that year? Since the whole year is kind of like a Shabbos of no work, do we have to celebrate Shabbos? And the answer is yes. And that's what the next verse comes to tell us. Sheishas Yamim Tasa, while you keep the sabbatical year, you still have to keep the regulations for the 6 days of work and the 7th day of Shabbos. Sheishas Yamim Tasa Malamasecha. You could still do other works, not planting fields. I don't know if you have another job in computers or something else, whatever, you're selling furniture, whatever else you're doing, you can do that. But still, B'yom HaShvi, on the 7th day, Tishbois, you must rest on the 7th day. So even though it's a sabbatical year, that doesn't take you up the hook from doing the 6th day and 7th day cycle that we have of keeping Shabbos. And on that day, why is it important? Your oxes, and your donkeys, they have to rest. Give them a break. And Rashi says, interesting here, he says, well, what does it mean to give them a break? Do I have to make them keep Shabbos like I keep Shabbos? Do I have to take them into the house? No. They don't have to act like the Jew, your ox. They could go in the field and they could eat grass. They could do all those things because that's not peace for them, locking up your ox in the house or in the barn and not letting them go out, they don't have to keep Shabbos like you keep Shabbos, but they have to still have peace and tranquility and relaxation. The nefesh, and the nefesh is that they have to be refreshed, and not just to your animals, ben amasecha, your servants. Rashi says it's talking about a unique situation where usually, by the way, it's interesting, most servants had to be circumcised. So when you hired even a non-Jewish servant, he had to accept himself some kind of Judaism of becoming, even though he's not Jewish and he became a non-Jewish servant to a Jew, he kind of becomes a little bit Jewish in the sense that he needs to even be circumcised. But if he doesn't want to be circumcised, you give him 12 months to be uncircumcised until he makes that decision. Give him 12 months to make that decision. Otherwise, you can't. It's a problem keeping him as a slave unless that was a condition before you took him to be a slave. The bottom line is, even he needs to keep Shabbos together with you. He's your servant. You have to give him a refreshing period. Very interesting. And the converts, which means even if he didn't do full conversion to Judaism, there was like a kind of a semi-conversion, which was that he accepted on himself to keep the 7 Noahide laws and also keep Shabbos. There was a semi kind of conversion that was allowed, because if you wanted to live in Israel at the time, at least this is the way Rashi is explaining it, that you wanted to live in Israel, you weren't a servant of a Jew, but you were allowed to stay in certain circumstances if you would accept the 7 Noahide laws that non-Jews do, and according to Rashi, or at least the way some commentators explain, also keep a partial kind of Shabbos on these people. So the sabbatical, even in the sabbatical year, you have to also celebrate and do the 6 days of work and the 7th day of keeping of Shabbos. Verse 13. And everything that I told you to Shameru, you should guard. Everything that I told you should do to Shameru, you shall beware. You should do all the mitzvahs. Now, Rashi points out something very interesting here. Tishameru means a warning, because you always warn. Torah always warns about not violating the prohibitions. Now, this is a general warning. In other words, it's not a specific warning. And regarding the laws of lashes, you only get when there's a specific warning. But this is a general warning, as the Torah always warns that you have to keep. It's adding a sense of prohibition. We know there's positive mitzvahs and prohibited mitzvahs. This is adding a sense of prohibition to the mitzvahs and telling you that it has these mitzvahs is adding a sense of a prohibition to not keeping the mitzvahs. So and you should not mention other idols. You should not mention other gods on my name. What does that mean? Rashi says it's very interesting. Number one, he says that you should not give directions by saying, doesn't mean don't serve idols. That was already told in the second commandment. You're not allowed to serve idols, and so on. What it means here is even giving directions by an idol, by basically saying, go to that idol and I'll meet you over there, or you using that as a landmark for directions. It's prohibited. You're not allowed to even mention idols, even just for a sense of direction. So it shouldn't even be mentioned on your mouth. Idolatry, not just you shouldn't learn about it and you shouldn't serve them, they shouldn't even come on your lips. You shouldn't even mention them, even just in passing, by giving directions by it. It's like saskiru, you shouldn't even mention the Torah says. That's how strict it is with idolatry. Another very interesting way of understanding this verse, as Rashi brings, is you have to read the verse as a whole together. It says, keep all the commandments and don't serve idols. He's basically telling you that idolatry is compared to all the commandments. It says keep all the commandments and don't mention idols. So it's telling you that if a person serves idols, he's violating all the commandments. And if someone doesn't serve idols, like he's keeping all the commandments. So the one commandment of idolatry, in a sense, is compared to all the other mitzvahs. Okay, like seskiru, like yishma picha, and not just are you not allowed to mention idols, you shouldn't even cause that another person, even a non-Jew, should mention idols. What does it mean? How would you cause another person to mention idols? So you have to be careful from that. It's like, let's say sometimes you might do business with a Gentile who believes in idolatry, right? And by doing this deal, you know that he's going to thank his idol. So you shouldn't do business with a non-Jew that will lead the non-Jew to mention idolatry. Shows you how far we go Not just so you're not allowed to serve idols, you're not allowed to even mention idols. And not just so you're not allowed to mention idols, you're not allowed to even work with someone that will cause the other person to mention idols. Very fascinating. Continuing right along, again, we're talking about the sabbatical year. What was our novelty we mentioned earlier? That sabbatical year, even though you're in a sabbatical year, you still have to keep Shabbos. Well, guess what? You might think that you don't have to keep the holidays then in a sabbatical year. Yes, you even in a sabbatical year, you have to keep the holidays. And even though, as we'll see, the holidays are based off agriculture, right? As we're going to see right now, when does Hashem designate the times for the holidays? The three famous holidays, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, are all based around the agricultural cycle. And we're not doing agriculture in the sabbatical year. Even then, you still have to keep the holidays and go up to the temple, like we'll see over here. You should have 3 times a year that you stop and you celebrate Hashem in the year. So besides the sabbatical year, besides Shabbos, there's also 3 times a year which Hashem designates holidays, which we should celebrate for Hashem, with Hashem. You should celebrate God during these times, in addition to everything else that we have. What are they? And he goes through, and very interesting the way he describes the holidays there, and he connects them to the agricultural cycle. Let's see. It's Chag HaMatzos, the Chag of the Matzah. That's Pesach. Tishmar Shivas Yamim, you should guard it and keep it for 7 days. The time of unleavened bread for 7 days. For Shivas Yam Techel Matzos, for 7 days, you should eat matzos. Like I commanded, yes, I've already commanded you. Right? Because when we left Egypt, Hashem already commanded us about the laws of Pesach. When do you keep it? In the month of the ripening. Why is it called the month of Aviv? So either one is because it's when the grain fills out, it gets filled up, when the grains get fully filled up, when they start getting full, or it means of, like a father, Aviv, like a father, like a firstborn. As soon as the grains start becoming ripe, at that point, when the grains, right, you planted in the rain season and they're starting to become ripe, right then, and filled up, celebrate Pesach, celebrate the holiday of Pesach at that time. Why? Don't want you to celebrate Pesach at this agricultural time, but for a specific thing that happened in history. Because that's when you left Mitzrayim. So you should celebrate the holiday of Pesach, and you should go up to celebrate this with Hashem in the temple. When you come up, do not come empty-handed. Come with gifts. Come with olos, burnt offerings to Hashem. Like when you go to someone, you go to celebrate the holiday, don't come empty-handed, but come up with gifts. Come up with gifts to Hashem. Now, following that point in the agricultural cycle of the fullness of the grain comes the time of the harvest, when we cut it, the Chag HaKotzir, in the time of the harvest. And what holiday do we have at the harvest, 50 days after Pesach? It's a holiday of Shavuos, when we start to cut all that grain that's been filling up, that's been getting ripe. B'kurei, you have to celebrate that holiday of Shavuos and that agricultural cycle. B'kurei Masecha, the first fruit of your work, which means the first things that start growing. Why is it called the Bikurim? What do we bring on the holiday of Shavuos? We bring 2 chalas. We bring the chalas from the new grain. And when we bring the sacrifice of challah, which comes from grain, all the other grains that are starting to grow from this new cycle become permitted to be used for the grain offerings. So you have to, for new grain to be allowed to be eaten, you have to first bring the grain offering, the first grain offering that comes from the new grain, and that allows all the other grains to be used. And that is brought in the holiday of Shavuos, right when the harvest of the produce takes place. And not just that, you also have to bring the first fruits, not just the grain, but also the first fruits are then brought into the temple, into the Beis Hamikdash, as you're bringing the first budding, ripening fruit to the Beis Hamikdash. And that happens right at the, makes sense, right at the harvesting season when you start to harvest everything. And then we have another harvesting season after that, the Chag HaAsif, that's the ingathering. Rashi explains, when you gather in your handwork. What does that mean? That you lay out after you harvested everything, you still spread the stuff out in the fields and they dry and it gets ready for drying. And then when Sukkot comes, when the rainy season is about to come in the next season, you bring everything in. You don't want it to get ruined during the winter. So you bring it, Minasad, you bring it from the field, and then you celebrate the third holiday, the holiday of Sukkot, celebrating the third part of the agricultural cycle when you bring it in. Shalish Pamim Bashana, 3 times a year. Yera Kol Zechorcha, every male, you had to make a trip. All the males would make a trip Al Pnei Adin Hashem, to go to see the Master Hashem. So you got to celebrate. Now he's telling you, although we learned already, you got to go up. All males have to make this 3-time-a-year trip to Israel, to Yerushalayim. He's telling you specifically in this cycle, it's important because now we're celebrating the sabbatical year. I might have thought in a sabbatical year, you're exempt from celebrating the 3 holidays. It comes to tell you, no, you're not exempt from celebrating the 3 holidays during this time. Now, finally, more details about Pesach. When you bring the Pesach sacrifice, we bring the sacrifice before the actual holiday of Pesach starts, right? We start to sacrifice it before we eat it. We eat it on the first night of the Pesach Seder. When you bring the Pesach sacrifice, you have to make sure there's no chametz left. You got to get rid of the chametz. And only then in the afternoon of Pesach, right, can you bring the Pesach sacrifice. We don't have a Pesach sacrifice today. We read about it in the shul. When we go to shul that night of the first Seder, when we go to shul, we read about this Korban Pesach. In those days, he tells you to make sure finish cleaning up. All your chametz has to be gone, and only then can you bring in the afternoon. That afternoon before the night of the Seder, you bring your Pesach sacrifice. Now, as Tam said, you should know that when there's the fats that are offered on the temple, right after the you burn the fats of the sacrifices on the temple, all that fat at that night after you bring the sacrifice, all of the stuff has to be put up sometime during the night on the altar in order to be burnt, because those are the gifts that you need to give to Hashem. Before the morning hits, before the morning strikes, you have to make sure the designated parts of the sacrifices have to go up on the altar to Hashem. Verse 19, the first of your fruits, even in the sabbatical year, when you're not working the field and you still have fruits that automatically grow, you might think, oh, I'm exempt, I'm not obligated to bring the first fruit. No, even in the sabbatical year where you're not doing agriculture, you're still commanded to bring the first fruit. Now, how do you know what the first fruit is? Rashi says very interesting. The person would go into his field as soon as the budding, like around now, right? Stuff starts to bud, at least in Israel. You would see a little flower pop up on a tree. You would go over to the flower, you take a rubber band, and you put a rubber band on the first stuff that sprouted, that started to sprout, and that would be considered your first fruit. And then the stuff would start to grow. And by the way, it's not from every fruit; it's only from the fruit of the 7 things that Israel was praised with. We know barley and wheat and dates and figs and pomegranates and olives, the 7 fruit that Israel was blessed with. You look in that area of your garden, of that area of your fields that you were growing stuff. You put a little rubber band on the flower, and as it would grow, you would bring the first fruit to Eretz Yisrael. And it finishes today. The Chumash that we're learning today, a very famous law. So again, the first fruit you bring Beis Hashem Lekech to Hashem's house. Do not cook a kid in its mother's milk. Now, a kid, I'm just going to finish with this explanation. A kid is a goat. You're not allowed to cook a goat in its mother's milk. Now, we all know that milk and meat is prohibited in any kind of meat, not just a goat's meat. So Rashi explains to you when it says a kid, a goat, it actually doesn't mean a goat. A gedi, it from obvious other areas in the Torah, and Rashi proves it, it means also a sheep, it means also a calf. So other meats are included in this example. So all, doesn't matter if it's a goat, doesn't matter if it's a calf, doesn't matter if it's a sheep, all tender animals, they're all prohibited to mix them together with milk. Now, Rashi also explains to you, it says this prohibition 3 times in the Torah. Don't mix a kid in its mother's milk. Why does the Torah say it 3 times? To tell you that this is more prohibited than many other prohibitions in Torah. What does that mean? It's more prohibited than many other prohibitions in Torah. Many other things in life that are prohibited are only prohibited to eat. But this, milk and meat, you should know, is more extreme. Not just are you not allowed to eat it, you're not allowed to cook it. And not just you're not allowed to cook it, you're not even allowed to benefit from it. An example of this would be, what would be benefiting without eating? So for example, your dogs, if you have dog food that's made with milk and meat together, you're not allowed to give it to your dogs to eat, because it's a prohibition of not just eating, it's a prohibited benefiting from. You have to be careful when you have animals not to give them animal food that is milk and meat together. And another example would be, what happens if I have a kitchen and I'm cooking for non-Jews? I'm not allowed to cook milk and meat together. Not just am I allowed to benefit from, even if I have guests over, I'm not allowed to cook for them, milk and meat together, because the Torah says it 3 times. This is one of them, which we're learning today. Don't cook a kid in its mother's milk. And therefore we learn not to eat, not to cook, and not to have any kind of benefit from milk and meat. It's a higher standard prohibition than most other prohibitions in the Torah. And that's the end of today's Chumash. Any questions or comments, my friends, on today's Chumash?